webinar. This is kind of a first of this kind of webinars organized as part of the newly launched Alumni Hub, which is an initiative that we started recently. As I recognize some names, and I'm happy to EC you again within Diplo's platform. For those of you that might be new to Diplo, we have a huge alumni, thousands of people around the world that have gone to the programs, mainly online, but not only, about contemporary diplomacy, internet governance, digital issues, and many other things. And this initiative is aims at helping the alumni to keep together and maybe boost and make the visibility of the alumni work greater. So this Alumni Hub will basically promote the dissertations that were made during the master courses and postgraduate, the alumni map, the blog posts. We organize webinars like this, share photos, videos, and so on. And of course, every one of you that are alumni are encouraged to send blog posts or share with us and suggest the blog posts, share research, other content. And at any point, of course, you can contact any one of us, and especially Patrick Borg. Can post again his email address later on. So this is the first of the webinar sets, and we thought of starting with a topic which sounds a little bit maybe general, touching upon the trust in digital policy, or trust in digital issues in general, in the digital world, if we wish. Patrick, thank you for sharing your email. We probably couldn't find a better guest for this first webinar than Desiree Miloshevic, who is with us today. Not only that she is part of this, so to speak, alumni and club of Diplo friends, and I invite all of you that maybe are not yet members of the alumni to join us for the courses and programs that Diplo organizes. So Desiree is not only the part of the alumni and an old friend within the internet governance debate. She has been very active in internet policies. I don't even want to mention how many years. It's going into decades actually, but she's not at all. She's just experienced. And the most important thing is that she made a scientific focus and research focus into direction of trust in digital policy. She did a master thesis with the Diplo's University of Malta program in this topic. So, well, I'm happy to pass the floor. Before that, just briefly about how the webinar is going to be organized. So Desiree will introduce the key points and basically introduce us into the key dilemmas when it comes to trust. Open the questions, the Pandora box probably, and then we'll move, so within the next 20 minutes or half an hour, and then we'll move into questions and answers and discussion with you. So at any point you're encouraged to post a question or a comment within the text chat. I will follow it closely. I won't interrupt Desiree until she finishes the presentation, unless there is a direct clarification needed. And then afterwards I'll pick all the questions and comments and start the discussion with Desiree, and you're of course most welcome to join the discussions afterwards. Desiree, I'll stop here and the floor is yours.
Just connecting my audio.
Okay, now we can hear you.
Camera, I guess.
Yes, and we can hear you. Excellent.
Hello everyone, and thank you Vladimir for that introduction. I'm very happy to be the first of the alumni to kick off this new series of your webinars. As you've mentioned, the idea here today is to give some introduction about the research that I've done on trust and in internet governance, and also to open the subject for discussion. So I'm hoping to have a more interactive discussion, and I probably won't do justice to my thesis in this presentation, but I'm happy to share the link because someone in the chat room has already asked for it. So it's on Diplo's webpage, and I'll add the link later on so you can follow that. So first of all, yes, welcome everyone to this discussion. I'm very happy to see a lot of people in the room, and let's start with our topic, which is the role of trust in digital policy. What I've done is the case study on applied ethics in internet governance institutions that are dealing with global resources, a set of 5 global regional internet registries, RRIs. And I will share those results of the research as well as the methodology that I use to study these institutions. So briefly, because the trust is such a broad topic, and it's a central issue for many policymakers today, especially after the Snowden revelations, it has become somewhat of a critical topic. So we'll briefly cover the trust etymology and the important difference between trust and trustworthiness, as well as why there is so much focus here. I'll run through some of the concepts I've been dealing with, such as trying to separate ethics from the concept of trust in other social science literature, such as psychology and sociology, and try to aim for some normative applied ethics in the institutions that I've studied. I will briefly mention the framework that are popping up currently after my study of how other policymakers are looking at describing the framework of trust. And I'll share some data, because one of the reasons I've chosen this research is that, as I said, it's so many policymakers are talking about trust, but there's a lack of data. So I went in and did a survey of 5 regional RRIs to gather data to see how trust is perceived and operationalized. Then I hope we can then have a broader discussion amongst ourselves, have interactive discussion. What is the role of trust or trustworthiness for the institutions in the digital policy? And as Vladimir has kindly mentioned, I'll probably open that Pandora's box and ask the question if the user trust on the internet can be restored. And in that view, we will cover potentially the roles and relationships between various stakeholders. As you can see, and I hope you can read some of the writings on the screen, the word trust has an etymology, and it shows in Old Norse as trauster, meaning strong, until it became part of the Old Middle English language and turned from traust and triesta, strong, into trust. And around the 13th century, it had different meanings. It had meanings of faith and help and confidence and protection. And you could follow later on that in Proto-Germanic, the noun actually traustem also meant comfort and meant consolation. And in Old High German, trust and Gothic trausti, it meant agreement and alliance. I think this picture symbolizes just one aspect of trust, and that is probably something called a profound trust. But it's between the individuals. It's very subjective, and it's there just to show that we actually have different kinds of trust between that I'll cover later on. And I think this team also speaks about why trust is important in internet governance, because I see the internet governance being the key element of a bigger picture of how the internet will be further developed and further deployed, what norms and what regulations will be put in place either to fragment it or keep it open. So in other words, the future of society therefore depends not only on Internet's technical development and its local deployment, but also on Internet governance acts with regards to new norms and new regulations, and including Internet governance institutions, all other stakeholders, users, corporate actors, and governance. And therefore, this lack of trust and may actually stifle an over-regulation. And if we see different norms dealing with trust or lack of trust and distrust, may stifle and freeze any other technical innovation, which may also lead to further fragmentation of the global network. I've mentioned briefly the importance that there was a big focus of Russell Hardin. I don't know how many of you heard of Russell Hardin, but there are many concepts I had to deal with in order to distill and come up with certain trust indicators and factors that I could use in my questionnaires to see how trust is operationalized in these institutional activities. So the basic research and I would say in social sciences has multiple concepts of trust and multiple roles of trust. So we can usually see some conflicts in these theories as well, which make things more complex. But it's one of the theories maintains that trust is a social virtue, and therefore it cannot be reduced down to a strategic self-interest. And the trust between persons is ultimately a rational calculation based on information about that person, on his or his incentives and motivations. That's yet another, if you like, definition of trust. But thirdly, Russell says that our trust in persons whom we believe to have strong reasons to act in our best interest. However, those strong reasons could also be reasons to kill or reason to do something wrong rather than necessarily having good intentions. And therefore we are correct when we assume that main incentive of those who we trust is to maintain a relationship with us, whether it would be for reasons of economic benefit or reasons for love and friendship, or reasons where you have no self-interest. So therefore, the difference between trust and trustworthiness is very significant, because trustworthiness is one where trust is a positive belief that does not need, trustworthiness is actually an earned activity, while trust on its own is a belief that does not need to be proven. So you can have all these multiple relationships where you trust someone to do something good or something bad, or to maintain this relationship, but trustworthiness is something that's already been proven. And that is I think, a very important distinction. It would be good if it entered into the policy vocabulary of our policymakers. And couple of words, why is really now the topic of trust everywhere, where we listen at the OECD ministerial or IGF workshops. I think it has become very topical since Snowden revelations, but also that safety and privacy of citizens is at stake. Very important human values and human rights that are being breached. And we are already seeing a dissipation and changes in users' behavior of how they use the internet. So we could easily say that trust is on top of the mind of all users, but also on all governments, because internet users of one nation or one region are no longer just citizens of that nation. They are part of the global network and they are global citizens, and I think this gives more headache to policy makers. So I've also mentioned that I updated this presentation with some new thinking of framework of trust. I've included a link to the Internet Society framework of trust, where they look at different layers of trust and at which different layers that could be an issue with trust. So, for example, they're looking at network layer, which is the application layer, the IP layer. So that means your cables and your satellite dishes and the infrastructure, which could be lacking trust. And then you go a step higher up and you get to the protocol layer, which they call technologies of trust, where you use PKI or encryption and so on. So the link is there. They mention also user trust, which is users' experience of how they perceive trust, whether it's in a relationship to some commercial entity or online platform like Facebook. Users form trust based on their experience, and also based on hearing about data leakage, about data breaches, about cyber attacks, and so on, dating website breaches. There's multiple examples. We can talk about why there is a change in users' behavior and the set of technical issues that this framework covers. And then there's this ecosystem as well as part of that framework, which is where I got interested in studying, especially regional interest registries, because they deal with global resources, they allocate IP addresses and AS numbers. So having explained why there's so much interest, I think one of my key questions when I started looking at this was, can trust be measured? And I'll share later on some of the measurements done by somebody else, but I think trust is a subjective matter and it's very contextual. Therefore, it would be very hard to be measured, and one needs to separate those normative questions of ethics and trust from questions from psychology. So that was one of the main challenges I had to deal with, and therefore the system and methodology I've designed was to look as how trust is perceived, how trust is experienced by the members of organization and internet governance institutions by doing that survey, and then looking at the perception of what is perceived as trust and how we can use those trust indicators for other internet governance institutions and policymakers to implement those and get a better understanding of their organization and what is required for them to amend or adopt new digital policies. So I mentioned briefly how much trust is there. The Edelman Trust Barometer showed that in 2015 trust fell in business sector from 59 to 57%. You can see it's still about 50%. In non-governmental organizations, NGOs, the trust indicator fell from 66 to 63, also 2%. In media, equally. However, the trust in governments rose during this time, which is a surprising factor, from 45 to 48, the whole 3%. But still, it's obvious that governments are still perceived as the most untrustworthy stakeholder or organization in this study. So the question whether one could restore trust is still this general question we can spend time discussing in a chat room. But it's important to say that trust takes years to build, and it takes seconds to break and forever to repair. The relationship that is probably, this matrix is probably useful in understanding this separation from ethics and what counts in normative questions we can raise about trustworthiness is here before, and I'll just briefly run through that. First of all, we can start looking at internet users and how they behave among themselves with other internet users, their interaction online, and you can study, for example, bullying, online violence, to give a simple example, whether it's on a social platform or some other place in the digital sphere. Then we have internet users and corporations, and I think this is an area that is going to become even more talked about with regards to trustworthiness of corporate actors and private sector. And here we can also see users or members of IG institutions. First to come to mind is ICANN, or a member of RRIs, and how trustworthiness is perceived in those organizations. What would be different trust indicators looking at those policies that they have in place? But if we look at the relationship between users and citizens and the state, we're actually going into realm of political philosophy. And there are norms like we can have treaties and we can have different legal instruments to deal with that. However, there's no single treaty that will solve this issue of trustworthiness. The main underlying concern, as we can clearly see, is probably the security issue and or the lack of it in the way how the system is built. So I've just here wanted to share a couple of remarks that Dave Clark, one of the founding fathers of the internet architecture, also mentioned recently. He said that when addressing the Internet Engineering Task Force and talking about the basic structure that users do not see when they look at the internet, they do not know where to look for trust, as you have to get the understanding of all the layers that are there in applications and actors and relationships. So he said our best success was not computing, but hooking people together. And that this security issue stays as the critical problem. And various organizations are trying to address it. But it's not only that. And that's why I think we should probably look at what are the various roles that stakeholders could have in trying to raise trustworthiness and improve trust. We cannot simply focus on technology. We need to look at regulations. We need to look at global politics. We need to take in law as well. What law enforcement agencies are doing, what kind of relationships they're building with internet governance institutions, with private sector, and with the state. We need more transparency about commercial aspects that are not necessarily apparent as to the behavior of certain actors. And also, we can imagine healthy development of our digital. How could we possibly imagine a healthy development of our digital society without solving all these issues that have been raised with the post-Snowden challenges that bring to citizens with the use of technology and communities? So I know I've been given 20 minutes to present here, and I will now touch base on the work of the RRIs. Again, some of the most interesting findings that I'd like to share with you today are that probably maybe not as surprising that I found in my thesis. But I think it's interesting that most critical elements that the LIRs or the ISPs that belong to the regional internet registries, they actually perceive the role of the board or the elected board of these in IG or internet governance institutions as the crucial, the relationship between the board and relationship with the community, with the internet community, as critical for continuing to have trust in the organization. Maybe it's because it's the most visible part that you can see from an organization. But it also talks about accountability and it talks about transparency as well of the act of the board members. And it's probably not surprising that accountability of ICANN also focused on some elements of how to deal with the governing structure of ICANN and whether to limit some of the powers of the board members, including veto and removing board members. So this is yet another non-for-profit internet governance organization, but the power and the trust is actually seen at the top. The elements that have been found as most damaging for trust in this organization was a non-transparent act. So, for example, if a law enforcement agency has knocked on your door and you have had an understanding or agreement with an organization, and that act has not been transparent and shared with a member, or if you had a breach of data, I could come up with multiple examples. That has been seen as most damaging for trust and not addressing issues adequately and not dealing with the external regulatory threats. And finally, but equally important, was deviation from policies. If people are familiar with the principles that all the regional internet registries commit to, I think you can find it on one of the sites, but they have 10 principles how they operate. And those principles are for them because they deal with this global management of unique resources, is that they should cover their own region and they should scale up to their particular region, and they should demonstrate a broad support for the community. And this is, they would not be established if there were not a broad support of ISPs or LIRs, and therefore they wouldn't be trusted. There is a principle of a bottom-up governance structure, and for local policies to be implemented, to be developed in a transparent manner. Anyone can participate and make a draft for internet policy with regards to allocation of IP addresses. There is also a principle of neutrality and impartiality. There is a need for technical expertise as they're dealing with technical maintenance of global resources and databases. But at the same time, they have to adhere to global policies. They need to have a public activity plan that fits the budget that is approved at the AGM. I'm talking about RIPE NCC in this case. But all of them, all 5 RRIs, regional internet registries, have to adhere to all these 10 principles. Otherwise, they would not be honest to their core mission. They have to have a funding model that is supporting. They have to have clear record keeping and confidentiality about their members and data that they collect, and do not misuse it. So some of the conclusions, and you will see how many graphs I've had, and differences between RRIs of how trust is perceived and operationalized within each of them. is different because they are not all the same. They are, but certain things state that there is demand for transparency, and there is a demand for slightly conservative business predictability, because you remember this is a membership organization where you pay a membership fee for your services to keep maintaining the resources for your IP addresses. If you're an ISP, you give them to your users, to other, and you need to, you expect a service, and therefore you expect to have a control, and that's another interesting psychological connection of people thinking having more trust if they pay for something rather than if service is free. But I think equally the organization and the institution has to stay true to its core mission, and that came as a very important indicator. I will share this. You can see my graphs if you, sorry. I'm trying to share, this, one of the links to the dissertation in the chat room with you. So someone has asked for it. And to close this, I will now open it up on the floor. I'll give it back to Vladimir to maybe start discussing the role of stakeholders and other questions we raised earlier. With that, I'll stop here, and it's over to you, Vladimir.
Thank you, Desiree. Excellent overview of of your work at first, and also some very useful case studies. I didn't want to interrupt you while you were presenting. We already started kind of a separate discussion in the chat, which you'll be able to review, or I'll just summarize it quickly. Already in your first slides, when we got stuck on discussing what trust means in comparison to confidence. I'll go through a couple of questions, or maybe I can start with this one and just bring a couple of key points over there so that you don't have to run through the whole chat. So let's maybe keep this first question while we are collecting the other questions and comments in the meantime. So the first discussion was about the difference between trust and confidence in general and in your in this context that you're covering, where Kishan, for instance, asked or noted that the trust tends to be absolute and the confidence is often measurable. So he was wondering whether you consider that, and whether we can really talk about trust in this international relations and digital policy, or it's more kind of a confidence. And then the discussion evolved on that in sense of Foncham saying that when you trust, you gradually build confidence. And then Ginger said confidence is substantiated in trust. Trustworthiness might be equivalent to confidence, or is it? And then Foncham said you cannot have confidence if somebody in somebody you don't trust. And then Barbara judged that, saying, but you can't trust somebody unless you have confidence in, and so on. So the question for you maybe is, how do you see the difference in this context between the different terms, meaning trust, trustworthiness, and confidence? Yeah, what are your thoughts?
Thank you. I think these are great observations and marks and questions. I tend to see confidence is equally subjective matter and difficult to measure. So I go back to saying that is, although Elderman barometer or trust have found a way of measuring trust, I find that very difficult, and because trust is mostly subjective. And when it comes to the confidence, trust and trustworthiness, I would say that it's easier to have a perception of trustworthiness because it's already something proven that you have done, as trust is usually not visible and it's lost, and we take it for granted perhaps because we rationalize whether we're going to trust somebody or some organization, And when it's lost, we only notice it at that point. So for me, trust is invisible, but trustworthiness is something that is a proven, if you like, a track record. And equally, confidence is similar to trustworthiness because it in itself, it seems to rely perhaps on some past actions and experience. You have confidence in someone because it seems that you might have had some kind of an experience already, and it talks about proven relationship between them. I don't think you can have confidence in something that is not like technically sound or solid or something that's just having confidence because you like it. Trust is much more subjective and contextual at the same time, but it's more like a belief. You trust that somebody will do something because you've decided to trust. So it's more subjective.
Thanks. I have two more follow-ups on that one particular, and then we'll go further on other comments. One is directly linked to that, and Barbara says, Internet users have usually no idea how Internet works. In one way, you could say that users might trust whatever the tech community does, as many would not be able to decipher the specifics anyway. At the same time, the difficulties of understanding the Internet might lead to mistrust. So the question for you was, in your research, did you find that the Internet is a particularly trusted or mistrusted domain? And then, similarly to that, or linked to some extent to what you mentioned in the conclusion and the case study on the regional Internet registries and ICANN, Desiree said, do others feel that community equals trust? So the strong link between having community and that actually builds trust.
Thank you for those questions, Barbara. And yeah, Vladimir, it's I think Barbara raises an important question that, as I mentioned, it's really typical for majority of Internet users not to have an understanding how the Internet works, what are the infrastructure layers in the sand, in the land, or undersea cables in the sea, or wireless, and what are the protocols that take those messages through these means of infrastructure, and then what are the applications built on top of these protocols that we use on our mobile phones, tablets, and desktops, and what kind of messages could we fail to see when some of leakages and data disappears, or it's hidden, or disappears, or when somebody installs a malware on your computer and sees everything that you do. So that understanding is something that Diplo has been trying to teach everyone, to look at different layers and to start to understand the topology. But I would, to go back to your question, distrust is an important part of trust. Like in democracy as well, you not necessarily want to trust someone entirely. Therefore, I like the Internet now has become a really challenged with mistrusted domain. I wouldn't say it's a trustworthiness, and that's why I try to go back to the perception of trustworthiness within one particular organization, then talk about trust. And to your point, I think, Vladimir, you had an additional question.
Trying to see which one was that. The one was, no, but that's, the other one was by Deirdre, that the link between community and trust. And in the meantime, we had also the comment from Ada who said, but you cannot create a community without trust, so it's chicken and egg dilemma. And then Deirdre responding, however, it is very easy to use the word community. So this link between community and trust that you mentioned in case studies, how do you observe that?
I think it's important to go back to see how the internet early networks started bringing each other to a global network. We have all decided and made a choice to connect, otherwise there wouldn't be a connection. And you can see that the smaller technical communities or the academic communities were the first one to connect, and therefore there was already some trust between the communities. So therefore I would agree with Deirdre, it is much easier to bring and have a trusted environment if you are already a community, and the internet is full of communities, and music scene is full, and Game of Thrones and so on. We're all just a set of communities. So I do see it's a chicken. It's not a chicken and egg, because I don't think you can artificially create communities. At the end, it will be a show that it is not a intrinsic community, but that's probably a theme for somebody else to study at Diplo.
For a next thesis. Huh? Okay, let's move from this linguistic and philosophical aspect of different terminology into a more substantial one. Foncham earlier raised a question, and he continued now. The trust seems to have a lot of role to play in e-commerce. And then he said, in your presentation, you stated that trust was very critical in the regional internet registries work, but you did not mention anything about e-commerce. So do you think the trust is also critical for e-commerce? I suppose your reflection would be, of course, but you might maybe reflect a bit more on this economic aspects, e-commerce and use of the internet from this commercial perspective and business perspective.
Certainly, I think in one of my slides back, I think it's slide 13, you can see that I said commercial interests have impact on the internet governance, but also on all the issues we're discussing here in the realm of policy and a role of trust or trustworthiness for digital policy. So because I focused on non-for-profit organizations in my thesis, I have not spent much time looking at commercial aspects. One of the conclusions in my study was that the trustworthiness, or how trust is operationalized within this organization, that there is definitely an element of business services and commercial element that is also perceived as important. So yes, you're right. I would definitely say that that's an area that requires much more study. That is not something that I'm covering here, because commercial aspects and trust are not apparent. If you look at big companies like eBay or let's say Alibaba Express, and you know that your item has to arrive and that their trust depends on the level of service that they offer to you, they will compete in trying to provide the best service, as that is the link they have with the user, if they're going to see them as reliable and trustworthy in their relationship with their customers and consumers. I'm just taking one online platform an example, but I think there are many, and the topic, we could be open about other commercial platforms like Facebook and like social networks like Twitter, and what are the elements and why would you trust those online platforms, and what is the link between trust and how it's perceived from users towards commercial organizations.
I wonder if you think that it might be any different, mentioning Facebook, for instance, or the social networks in which the trust is eroded. The models that we've seen emerging somewhere where the social networks actually tend to bring back a little bit of their revenue to the users. Do you think that these kind of services, because you mentioned that the payments, when you pay to something, you might have more trust. That some services actually offer that you earn from them. Do you think that that is something that can also help trust? And is it something that makes sense after all?
I think we are, yeah, when I mentioned that people have more trust, they have a perception of having more control over the service if they purchase something or if they have spent money acquiring that service. So they feel that they should trust that platform more because they paid some money and therefore they're going to get a reciprocal value out of that exchange and transaction. They earn trust by reputation and by being nice to the consumers, and if something breaks, you get a new helicopter or a new drone, parts delivered to you. So there is a cost, and there is actually not everyone can compete with that cost of having a good service and dealing adequately with, for example, claims and issues that might arise. You raised an interesting thing, whether those social networks could start paying back. But would that actually create additional trust that they're sharing their revenue? There is a whole new conference platform, cooperative.net, that talks about the new models of sharing economy. And there is something to be said that sharing economy models are going to become popular because you would see that some of the exchanges that happen between the users and the online platform may form stronger community links with the service itself. So we go back to the community question and where trust is. There's a lot of going on in the chat room, so we should.
Yeah, I have at least 3 more questions noted, and there are many more that I should pick. So let me see. The next one that I have was from Carlos, who said earlier. I'll try to explain. It was not a clear question, but I think I'll get the point. So he said, do we need trust actors? In the sense, do we need some specific actors that actually we can trust in? And how can we make a mechanism that can allow SMEs, government, citizens, organizations to complain to the work in order to strengthen the trust in specific actors?
Yes, that's a very good remark, because there's obviously a need for it, and it's probably something that has not been adequately addressed. And the question is, this is not really a question of personal trust. Maybe this is the idea of vulnerability as well as expectation, and whether it considers that one of the parties and the other is a consumer, or if one of the parties in this case is the consumer, and if they trusted the organizations, would they be willing to be vulnerable to the actions of these organizations, or whether this organization, based on the expectation, would perform a particular action important to the consumer to accept its claim and the ability to monitor and control the organization. It would definitely add to the transparency, and I think that is, as we have seen in my findings elsewhere, a key ability to freely express what we see effective communication that could lead to the progress.
Thanks. Also, Desiree mentioned transparency She says because of the loss of trust, the call for transparency now seems to be becoming absolute, so that the possibility of representation is being rejected. I would probably add that the transparency, and that's also a bit of a question, that is transparency simply enough, or we need mechanisms to impact the decisions as well. But I suppose I know your response. Let me move on. Monica at some point raised a couple of questions, and I tried to put them together. So if I understand correctly, her focus is kind of, she said the whole presentation that you did was kind of aligned with the human resources angle, in sense of there are certain professionals which are engaged in the whole governance model and building the technology and policy. And then she says more and more we see there is a person-to-person behavior issue, and then in a nutshell she's questioning, are there certain people, individuals, professionals that actually work to damage trust, whether with purpose or without purpose, but many times with purpose, and they might have some kind of a end goal or end game. How do you see that? Is there a need to kind of let's say chase witches within the community, the people that can actually have purpose to destroy a bit of trust, or are simply unreliable?
I have not come across that apart from trolls on the mailing lists. In my kind of short time frame of trying to see who is trying to destroy trust on purpose. But there are definitely actions that are conscious by certain actors that are there to that as an effect have lack of trust, or they destroy trust. And I'm thinking about monetary and some kind of economic benefits that exist. So if a company would like you to, whilst installing an Adobe or some other program, to also install a malware that sends them every key you type, certainly they're doing this on purpose. So there are a lot of companies that are living off users' data and that are undermining trust. There are botnets that we see users become prey of and victims, and so on. So I would say, yes, there's certainly organizations, individuals that are constantly working on undermining trust or security of some of the technologies and the network and devices, and as well as probably affecting users' behavior by hiding their actions, so they're not visible.
Okay, the discussion is going on. We have a couple of more minutes, and I at least have two questions. So let me start with Roxana, who said it is interesting to look at trust also in light of peering arrangements and the predominance of non-written agreements as opposed to formalized ones, for instance between the internet bandwidth providers, the tier 1 especially. Insight on this from your research on regional internet registries. So any thoughts on this kind of non-written agreements such as peering agreements opposed to formalized ones, and the relation to trust?
I think that's a very good example Roxana uses, and I think the view of the community was that there was no need for the written agreements, because the trust was very personal and very strong among some of the tier 1 providers. They knew they were exchanging traffic. I believe you are referring to peering agreements, and the peering agreement is when you expect to carry a lot of traffic, users' traffic, and it's worthwhile for you to just exchange traffic with another provider, because therefore you don't need to go into commercial agreements. You know that there will be equal benefit of this mutual exchange. and therefore there is no need to have a contract. This has actually been covered in an OECD study. You can find online, and I can send a link as well, that the reason the non-existence of this 99% of these agreements are done somewhat in the closed rooms, but there is trust there as well, that they will exchange traffic and there will be mutual benefit from them exchanging traffic and not having to document it. There is I have not found any elements of distrust, but this wasn't a focus of my research. It's more coming up with trust indicators to see how we can look how members perceive the organizations, what are the gaps, what are the critical issues for them, and what steps the organization should take to improve or understand how they're perceived by their membership to offer better services and to be true to their core mission.
Okay, two last questions. I'll stop there, and the chat can, of course, continue. One is from Say No, who says, who emphasizes the cultural aspect of trust, i.e., the different understanding and definitions from one country to another, from one region to another, Africa, Europe, Asia, America. The differences can be it can be difficult to make a difference and understand what trust means in different regions. Did you take this into consideration? What is your quick reflection on the cultural understanding?
I think there are definitely differences in approach and even answering the questions. For example, certain cultures don't feel very good revealing their personal perception of the organization. Maybe they find it unimportant, or maybe they find it, although the survey was anonymous, maybe they find it too pervasive. So specifically in one of the 5 regions, the respondents were very I think very few, but there also might have been a language barrier as well. There are certainly differences in how trust is perceived, let's say in Asia Pacific, then that's how it's perceived in Western Europe or in North America versus Latin America and versus Africa. That's something I've actually looked into, and I think it's probably hard to generalize this right now, but we tend in the Western societies to tend to marry this trustworthiness and trust with the exchange and the benefit, and measuring up the self-interest of our own according to the actions of the organizations we have decided to perceive as trustworthy. So I think it's more tied in with the economics rather than Asia Pacific, some of the Asia Pacific region, not all of it, where trustworthiness is perceived as something different. But I think I will, might have run out of time here a little bit, but I'm happy. I think this is a very interesting topic, and I'm happy to go further and to discuss that offline or over email as well, about the findings I have.
Sure. Desiree, I think we can call it a day. We had a couple of more questions, but I think we can stop there, and then I invite all of you, of course, to stay within the chat. The room is going to stay open, so you can continue chatting, and Desiree, depending on if you're available, you can still, of course, stay and respond to a couple of more questions. Otherwise, we'll be happy to, as you said, to continue offline. I want to thank you for your time, for this session and the great discussion. I see this is a very hot topic, and I'm happy that we also picked a good topic, which is unfortunately a high pitch these days when it comes to digital policies. We'll certainly continue this in one way or another through blogs or other discussions. I also want to thank to all of you for coming today, both the alumni and non-alumni members. We'll follow up on this. We'll go on with the webinars. You're of course more than invited to join the DiploInternetGovernance.org community, the social network, and suggest any kind of topics for webinars, suggest blogs in your area of work, share the work you do or any kind of research and update from your professional life, so we kind of keep the community together. And of course, if we meet somewhere and you still haven't got the badge, the Diplo badge from us, make sure to remind us to give you the badge, the pin. Okay, thanks again, everyone, and thank you for coming, and keep in touch. Feel free to ping us for ideas and follow-up projects. Thank you, and good day. Thank you, Desiree, once again.
Thank you all. Yes, see you in the chat
Bye.
room a little bit more. Bye-bye.